Hello everyone. So in this video, I want to start discussing about enlightenment. So ideally you should have already watched the video with the introduction, so the video introduction to enlightenment and the video about what enlightenment is not. And so you should have already a basic idea that basically what they call enlightenment is really just the process of realizing that we have certain beliefs and assumptions, certain mental conditionings that for some reason end up generating stories that lead to suffering. So we are going to start addressing those beliefs one by one, the most important ones. I'm sure there are plenty of beliefs that generate stories and lead to suffering. And I actually don't believe what the classical Buddhists say, that basically there is such a thing as a final state that is reached, a final enlightenment where you suddenly become enlightened and everything is over. I believe that it's more a gradual process of realization. So step by step, you realize things. Just like you could argue that, let's say, realizing that Santa Claus was not real was probably the first step. So in some way, everyone is to some extent a little bit on the path of enlightenment. By having realized that Santa Claus is not real, we have probably all done our first step. But probably other realizations came along the way and we already executed. So let's say, for example, at school, we believe that the opinion of our teachers is very important. Or as children, we believe that the opinion of our parents is very important. Now, this one could still stay for some people. Depends, of course, how old you are, but maybe if you're 40 or 50, you kind of see your parents for what they are. They are just human beings like you, and maybe they did their best, maybe they did not, but there is nothing special about them. They do not hold some kind of ultimate source of authority or ultimate source of truth. So you probably care a lot less today about what your parents think or their opinion. I mean, maybe you care about what they think about you because of the relationship that exists, but you don't necessarily care about their opinion of the world. Whereas when you were a child, probably you were relying on them to form and build an opinion about the world. So, is this right? Is this wrong? Should this happen? Should this not happen? You were probably relying on them. Now you probably have completely different opinions about, let's say, what happens in the world. You don't really care, you don't really value their opinion so much. Also, your teacher at school, you probably realized they were just people trying their best, doing their job. And maybe a lot of things they said were just their opinion. So this is an important realization that usually happens automatically. But maybe your teacher told you that you were terrible and you would never amount to anything. And maybe they were wrong. Or maybe they told you that you were amazing and you will do brilliant things, and maybe you did not. The point is not really to judge anyone. The point is, at the end of the day, they were just stating their opinion. And their opinion was just as good as everyone else's opinion. So, I mean, it could have been interesting to listen to them. Yeah, of course, you get an extra opinion. And I'm not saying to ignore opinions. I'm just saying to take them for what they are, opinions. But when you were a child or when you were at school, what your parents or your teacher were telling you, it didn't really feel like just some opinion. It probably felt like a lot more than that. I'm not saying as if God had descended on earth and told you some absolute truth, but maybe almost like this. I mean, in some way, when you're a child, what your parent tells you seems to be the truth, seems to be an absolute truth. What your teacher tells you, you rarely question it. Same for the parents. But as we age, we then realize that those guys were just people and their opinions were just opinions. And we realize that there are many more opinions. And so we care less about what they were saying. This is part of a process. It's a process of realization that our mind was and is conditioned by information that we acquired consciously or unconsciously without having the direct experience. So we just took up information from our parents and from our teachers and from TV and newspaper and our friends and etc., without really checking it, without really experiencing it personally. We just assumed that it was true. and it then becomes part of our map of reality, of our view of the world, and we take it for granted. We say it must be true. So if your parents told you that you were not very bright, you may still be holding this belief today, or maybe you realize that they were wrong. Or any opinion really, because it doesn't really matter what it is. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to achieve amazing things. It doesn't. It's just the realization that those were just opinions. So some people just like to share their opinion. Most people will share their opinion at some point or another. And it's just important to remember that those are opinions. So it's just a bunch of people stating their opinion. And sometimes you can verify it because you can experience it, or at least you can notice that it's very coherent. So let's say if someone gives an opinion and you never, because you can either experience the thing itself, which of course is preferable, or you can never experience anything that contradicts it. So if someone tells you something and you experience it directly, that's different because at that point you have experienced it. So it's not really a belief that you hold. I mean, initially it was a belief, but then it gets converted into a direct experience because you have experienced it. Now, if someone tells you something and you don't experience it, but you never experience anything that contradicts it, and you maybe experience things that kind of indirectly support it, then maybe you keep that belief. I mean, you still remember it's a belief. You may just give it a high probability of being true. It's like, but still you know it's a belief. Of course, different beliefs will have different degrees of probability. So if someone tells you there is a flying monster behind the sun that can never be seen because it's behind the sun, you will probably give this a low degree of probability. You will say, yeah, I mean, that's his opinion. I may respect his opinion, but it's very unlikely to be true. Now, of course, if then you happen to actually experience it because one day that monster flies in front of the sun and everyone can see it, then you will change your mind. But you change your mind because you have seen it. Now, if you have not seen it and someone has told you, then you need some kind of, let's say, support, indirectly supporting evidence, or at least no contradictory evidence. So now the contradictory evidence doesn't need to be necessarily evidence as in something experienced, but it can also be how much something makes sense, how much it is coherent with the rest of reality, with the things you have seen or experienced in general. So let's say, well, this monster, what it looks like, and then what does it eat? So someone could say it eats asteroids, but asteroids do not contain energy. So food is a source of energy. So there are specific chemical properties it must have. No animal eats stones because stones do not contain potential energy. So the energy is, I mean, I'm not going to go into detail, but it's like the sun basically sends its energy on Earth and the plant absorbs this energy, and then they contain this potential of energy that can then be consumed by other animals. So there are specific rules about what energy is in chemistry, let's say. So no, the monster cannot eat asteroid. Now it could maybe, of course, absorb energy directly from the sun. So okay, if it absorbs energy directly from the sun, that's one thing. So what does it do? I mean, so first of all, it doesn't burn. Where does it come from? Because if it's there, it must come from somewhere. And how come it never go on the other side of the sun? And what does it do? And I mean, you start asking questions basically. So now if you can always find very coherent answers to those questions, then maybe you can keep that belief. If you cannot, then maybe you could discard that belief. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to discard it with absolute certainty. So we are not trying to go from believing something to believing its opposite. So the point of, let's say, believing there is a monster behind the sun that is hiding is not to replace that belief with another belief that says that there is no monster behind the sun as an absolute certainty. I mean, maybe there is some monster behind the sun. It's probably unlikely, and there is no reason why this should be the case, but the goal here is not to transform it into its opposite. So when you realize that Santa Claus does not exist, it's not that you transform the belief that Santa Claus exists into the belief that Santa Claus does not exist. So the belief of Santa Claus not existing. You just drop the belief of Santa Claus existing. That is, you say, well, as far as I know, there is no such thing as Santa Claus, or it's just a story. It's not that you transform it into another certainty, as in, there is no Santa Claus. I am absolutely sure of the non-existence of Santa Claus. because that will become a new belief in itself. Now, at least that belief is more grounded. It makes more sense. It's more coherent with the rest of reality. But why does it even matter? Because why focus so much on Santa Claus? Because then you could say that a lot of things don't exist also. And it's not that you are going to build some kind of strong belief that, let's say, some weird creatures do not exist. You just say, well, as far as I know, they don't exist. I don't really care about them. So you drop the belief. You don't replace with a new belief that it's not true. So let's look at the first belief, a belief that probably everyone has, and it's deeply rooted. And it's a belief that it's more like an assumption. So we don't really say it necessarily in words in our head. It's not that we have a mental conversation about this belief. Well, we may have about its symptoms, and you will see what I'm talking about. But in general, this is a very, very deeply held belief. It's the belief, what is called in the fetters, in the Buddhist process of the fetters, it's called desire and ill will. Now, usually people will associate this as in the idea that one should not have desires. So desire is bad, attachment is bad, which, by the way, are just new beliefs. So you should not desire as if it's some kind of rule. You should not be attached to things, which already doesn't make sense. It's obviously incoherent, because to the least, if you desire not to desire, you are desiring. But you must desire certain things to be alive. I mean, you must desire in the morning to stand up, to leave your bed. You must desire to drink water. You must desire to eat, or you will die. So realistically, anyone who is alive right now, at least they desire to wake up in the morning, eat food, drink water, and not, let's say, do crazy stuff that will kill them. I mean, they have to desire to some extent to protect the integrity of their life. When they cross the street, they will wait for the green light. They will not close their eyes and cross with the red light, because they desire to keep on living. So this idea that one is supposed to and can overcome desire is ridiculous. And the same for attachment. It's like, I mean, you must have some attachment. You must have some attachment to your health. You must have some attachment to your money, because if you end up sick and without any money and you starve, you will not last long. And again, for attachment, we can say the same. So absolute non-attachment will also mean that you should not be attached to the idea of non-attachment. And then it doesn't make sense. It's just like desiring not to desire is a desire, and being attached to non-attachment is an attachment. So those things don't make sense. They are kind of a superficial interpretation of the fetters, and a lot of people get lost in those ideas. And because they are incoherent, there is really no way out, because you start believing in something that doesn't make sense, and you kind of get stuck. So my understanding from my personal experience and from different people I spoke with is that what is actually meant by desire and ill will, and let's say just desire in general, those fetters, is more the desire as a story. It's the desire as a judgment, really. So it's the desire that things should be different, that things could be different, because again, it's about a story. Of course, we have something in our brain that makes us desire certain things that are good for us, things that increase our chance of survival. Of course, we are also attached to certain things that are good for our survival. Those are not stories. This is basic evolution. It's not a conditioning. The fact that we desire to eat and drink is like our instinct. Is not conditioning. The conditioning is stories, ideas, beliefs, assumptions that we take from others without experiencing them. We experience every day that eating is good for us. If we don't eat, we feel hungry. And if we don't eat for too long, we die. And if we don't drink, we feel sick. And then we die. So those are not conditionings. Those are not beliefs. Those are not stories. So then, what is the story desire and the story attachment? What is it in the world of stories? What does it mean, this fetter of desire? Well, it's the idea that we judge. So most of the stories that we tell ourselves, if not all of them, are judgment. So the story is a judgment. So it's like, let's say there is what we experience, we can call it reality, but again, it's just an arbitrary word to describe what we experience. So we know that we experience something. Of course, we have a subjective experience. I mean, I know that I'm currently recording this video and I can see my face on the camera, etc., etc. So I know I'm experiencing something. That's a certainty because I'm experiencing it. So to the extent that I'm experiencing it, I know that I'm experiencing it. But then on top of this direct experience, we build some stories. We build some judgments. It's mostly judgments, really. So the stories manifest as judgments. So because of certain beliefs and assumptions, we produce stories that we superimpose on top of what we experience. So there is what we experience, and then on top of that, we add an extra layer, which is our judgment of the experience. This is similar to what I was saying in the previous video, the idea of first dart and second dart. So first dart is pain, but it doesn't have to be pain, it could also be pleasure, yeah? But let's stick to pain and suffering. So the first dart would be pain, so you break your leg and you feel pain. There is no way that anyone cannot feel the pain if they break their leg. And then after that, the second dart is the judgment, is the story, is the suffering, where you tell yourself something like, oh, why me? This is so unfair. This should not have happened. Why did I break my leg? Why God hates me? Why I'm so unlucky? Maybe I will never walk again. No one will ever love me if I cannot walk properly, etc., etc., etc. So we build the stories. The stories are an extra layer that we put on top of reality. They're a judgment of reality. And usually they make us feel bad. They produce suffering because as a judgment, they imply that something is wrong with reality, something is wrong with our experience. It implies that things should be different, things should have been different. Maybe something should not have happened, or something should have happened, or the fact that something is happening is wrong, etc., etc. So this is the idea, I think, of what desire is in the context of the enlightenment, of the removing the conditionings from the mind. It's removing this extra layer of conversation, but it's not any conversation because mental conversations can be useful. I mean, we use our mind to think, and this is useful. It's more the judgment conversation when we judge reality compared to our assumptions. So it's as if we were saying, well, Santa Claus does not exist, but that's wrong. Santa Claus should exist. And now the reality feels a little bit worse than before. We feel some suffering because instead of just being in reality and saying, well, it is what it is, we say, well, it is what it is, but it's wrong because Santa Claus should exist. And there is something wrong about the fact that Santa Claus does not exist. So we just make the experience a little bit worse by adding this judgment. Now, I think this is really the core of the desire issue as a mental conditioning. It's the idea that we believe that things could or should be different. But to some extent, why? I mean, as far as we know, and again, this is not a certainty, but certainly we don't have proof of its contrary either. As far as we know, everything is kind of deterministic. And if it's not deterministic, then it's random. But let's say from the Big Bang onwards, everything is the result of causality. So there is this Big Bang, this initial explosion, and some particles propagate and they collide, they interact with each other, they influence each other, they do stuff, and that stuff brings us to where we are now. So what is the cause of the universe right now, or the world? The cause is what existed, let's say, 1 second ago. And what is the cause of what existed 1 second ago? It is what existed 2 seconds ago. And what is the cause of what existed 2 seconds ago? It's what existed 3 seconds ago. And you can go all the way to the Big Bang. And actually, what is happening right now is the cause of what will be in 1 second. And what will be in 1 second is the cause of what will be in 2 seconds. So there obviously is this chain of causality. So what does it mean that things should be different? What is that should? What does it mean that things could have been different? What is that could? I mean, maybe you could argue that if the Big Bang had been a little bit different, maybe, then yes, things would have been different. But you have to go back all the way to the Big Bang. You cannot put an arbitrary event, let's say, or an arbitrary time and say, well, 3 years ago I broke my leg, and if only I had not broken my leg, like I shouldn't have broken my leg, this was wrong. As if at this specific point in time there was kind of a turning point, and the universe should have took a different direction so that you would not have broken your leg. But that doesn't make sense because there is a very clear cause for why you broke your leg back then. It's because 1 second before, the universe was in a specific state that led you to break your leg. And that state was also kind of inevitable because it was the result of the state 1 second before, and the result of 1 second before, and 1 second before, etc. So there is really no way you wouldn't have broken your leg. It just doesn't make sense. You just broke your leg because there is a continuity of events starting from the Big Bang till today, and unfortunately, that continuity of events led to you breaking your leg. But the should is just imagination. Really, the idea that there is a should, or that things could have been different, things should be different, there should be Santa Claus, I shouldn't have broken my leg, is the same as saying there should be Santa Claus. There is no difference. It's not more crazy. I mean, the Big Bang did not lead to the creation of Santa Claus. The Big Bang did not lead to you not breaking your leg. It's the same. We just like to add this extra layer of judgment, which is the result of a conditioning, is the result of the belief that maybe it was possible. But that will defy the laws of physics, because it was not, because everything is causality. From the Big Bang to now is just a long chain of events, and every event is caused by the previous event. There is no point in which some kind of decision is made. Our brain is also subject to the laws of physics. So every interaction that happens in our brain, every neuron, every synapse, whatever happens in the brain, is also subject to the laws of physics. It also comes from the Big Bang. Of course, a lot of time has passed, and a lot of intermediary events have happened. But really, they're all connected, they're all chained from this initial event. So the idea of should or could usually implies that there is some sort of agency, some sort of agent, like a separate agent, that we have some kind of free will. Now, I'm not saying that we for sure do not have free will. So I'm not proposing to add a new belief that we do not have free will. But I'm saying that for sure there is no evidence that we have free will. At least it will go against all the laws of physics. So for now we have some certain evidence that suggests that most likely there is no free will. But of course, things could change. Tomorrow science could discover something else. So science has often changed direction as we discover new things. But for sure, with the information we have now, it's not reasonable to assume that there is such a thing as free will. Now, we shouldn't assume its opposite either, because we never know what science will discover tomorrow. But it's just easier not to hold the belief. I mean, at the end of the day, we cannot prove with absolute certainty that Santa Claus does not exist. It's impossible. How do you actually prove? Maybe it's there hiding somewhere, and it just never, maybe it's a Santa Claus that has given up on giving gifts, and it just lives a life of isolation somewhere in the North Pole, and we have not found him yet. Or maybe he's dead. Maybe he's buried under the ice, and maybe one day someone will find him. So after all, maybe Santa Claus does exist, and it's probably impossible to prove that it doesn't. But that doesn't mean we are going to believe that he exists. We just don't think about it. It's just a story. We just ignore it. We just don't care. We have no good reason to believe that Santa Claus exists. And we have no good reason to also believe that there is absolute evidence that he doesn't. So we just remove the belief. We don't replace the belief with its opposite. We just remove the belief. So, of course, maybe one day science will discover that after all there is something such as free will and agency and whatever. But for now, it doesn't look like it's the case. It doesn't look like there is any sort of special agency or special free will, because free from what? I mean, what does free will mean exactly? So free from what? Free from causality? Free from the laws of physics? I mean, that doesn't really make sense. How could we actually have free will as, let's say, unique and separate agents. How would it work? So there should be some part of our brain that is kind of immune, isolated from the laws of physics. Like there is a small area in our brain where the laws of physics do not operate, and that part is completely immune. It's outside of causality. That part is not, because if that part is influenced by causality, then it's not free. It doesn't have free will. So to have free will, it must be completely independent from causality. There should be a small part of our brain that is completely independent from causality. Now, that would of course go against everything we know about physics and science. Now, I'm not saying it's for sure wrong. Maybe yes, maybe there is a small part of our brain that is completely immune from the laws of physics. And maybe in 100 years, science will discover it. But it doesn't seem to be very plausible. It doesn't seem to make sense. So why should we have this belief now? We have no reason to have this belief. It seems much more logical that there is no part of our brain that is immune from causality, that is immune from the laws of physics. So our brain, at the end of the day, is just like the rest of the environment. Of course, it's more complicated, it's more sophisticated, but our brain really operates just like a chair or a table. It's like it's atoms and molecules and chemical reactions and etc., etc. It is completely based on causality. Our brain, there is no separation between, let's say, our body and the environment. Of course, our body can move within the environment, but then even a stone can move. Even air and water move. So a lot of things move, like planets and galaxy moves. The Earth goes around the sun, and the sun goes around the center of the galaxy. But they are still the environment. It's not that because they move, we believe that they have some kind of special agency or free will. And again, free will is an interesting word, because when we say free, we have to wonder, free from what? And free will basically means free from causality, free from the laws of physics, which doesn't make any sense. When you start thinking about it, it doesn't seem like a strong proposition. The idea that we have some kind of agency, we are independent agents that decide freely, and we have free will. When you start thinking about the implications, that should mean that there is a small part of your brain, or a big part, that is completely immune from causality, completely independent from causality, that it's not related in any way to the laws of physics. But that doesn't make any sense. So most likely there is no such thing as agency and free will. It's just a long chain of events that starts with the Big Bang and continues till now. Now, once you understand this, that this makes a lot of sense, it's not about being true, because first of all, what is truth anyway? But it's just like it makes a lot of sense. So it makes a lot of sense that there is no Santa Claus. It makes a lot of sense that our brain is not immune from the laws of physics and from causality. It's just a long chain of events that starts with the Big Bang and leads us to here where we are now. That makes sense. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it should become a new belief. It just makes sense. And it makes more sense than its opposite. So then maybe we can consider dropping the belief that there is agency and free will. And if we drop this belief and we stop believing that there is agency and free will, then what does should means? What does could means? It doesn't mean anything. There is just a single long chain of event from the Big Bang to now. It's not that it's going to fork in some kind of alternative reality based on some decision that you made, and that you made one decision that led to you breaking your leg, and you could have made a different one that would have led to you not breaking your leg. Because how could you exactly have made a different decision? I mean, your brain did some stuff. What your brain did depends on what the universe was doing 1 second before, and that depends on what the universe was doing 1 second before, etc., etc., etc. So how exactly you believe that your brain took a decision that led to either breaking your leg or not breaking your leg? And so you add this judgment that it should have been different, it shouldn't have happened, you shouldn't have broken your leg, or you could not have broken your leg if something had happened. Yes, but that thing did not happen. Because where does that thing exist if not in the imagination? So when we use should and could, all we are doing really is we are comparing our experience, the reality in front of us, with some kind of imagined reality. And usually we like to imagine this imagined reality as better than the current reality. And so we suffer because we say, oh, the imagined reality is better than the current reality. I wish I was in the imagined reality. And that leads to suffering. But it also leads to suffering because we believe that this is possible, that this is plausible, that it could have happened, that it should have happened. If we realize that it's nonsense, it loses a lot of its strength. I mean, a child may believe in Santa Claus. And I mean, of course, the thing is, once we tell him that Santa Claus does not exist, he doesn't say, oh, but it should exist, or it could have existed. He's not going to judge reality based on an imaginary reality which contains Santa Claus, which he believes is better. He's not going to do that. Because he realized that once they explained him that it's not true, he realized that it never made any sense in first place. So it cannot be true, really. So he just abandoned the idea. He just drops the belief. So what is the difference between believing in should and could and Santa Claus? There is really no difference. Of course, it's a little bit easier to understand that, let's say, Santa Claus is very implausible, it's very improbable, it's very incoherent, it doesn't fit. It has just so many contradictions. It's easier to notice that it doesn't make sense. It's easier to drop the belief. But if we understand that everything is based on causality, and this causality starts with the Big Bang, and it's just one cause leads to one effect, and that effect leads to another effect, and leads to another effect, and it's just a long chain of events connected by causality, and that's what the laws of physics are there for. They ensure this continued causality. So what sense does it make to believe that some part of our brain is immune from causality, is immune from the laws of physics? Is it very so different compared to believing in Santa Claus? It's similar. And actually, once we realize it, it's difficult, just like Santa Claus, it's difficult to go back and say, no, but actually I think that some part in my brain is immune to the laws of physics and is immune to causality. It's difficult. I mean, if you really understand that it's all causality from the Big Bang to now, how can you go back and say, well, but no, actually, there is a small part of my brain that is immune from causality and from the laws of physics? It doesn't make sense. So you cannot, once you understand, you cannot really go back to believing this. And once you remove the belief, you cannot really keep thinking in terms of should and could, because what is should? What is could? It's just a story that we add on top of reality. So we have reality, which is just what we experience. I mean, I'm using the word reality only to express the idea of what we are experiencing. I'm not saying it has any kind of special or metaphysical meaning. Reality, for me, is just what we experience. That's our reality, what we experience. So there is what we experience, and there are stories that we add on top of it. Now, not all stories are problematic, because again, it's useful to think, like I'm also thinking within my head when I speak, so we can say I'm building a story. The issue are the stories that are a judgment, and the judgment always has to start from a belief or an assumption. So you judge reality because you assume or believe that it could or should be different, that this is possible, at least you believe that it's possible, that things could or should be different. And so you express this judgment that you apply as an extra layer on top of reality. So you have your reality, plus on top of it, you have the judgment, which is, yeah, it's like this, but it shouldn't be like this. Or it's like this, but it could have been different. So it's like saying Santa Claus does not exist, but it should exist. And then you're sad. You're like, oh, the world sucks because there is no Santa Claus. There should be a Santa Claus. What a horrible world. A world without a Santa Claus. That's a terrible world. There should be a Santa Claus. Or there could have been a Santa Claus. But that doesn't make sense. We are just using some weak belief, some weak assumptions, some weak ideas as strong and deep beliefs, and we are building a story based on those beliefs. And that story is a judgment of reality, and usually it's a negative judgment. So it's, oh, reality is not that great because there is no Santa Claus. Or, yeah, I mean, it's terrible that I broke my leg. I should not have broke my leg. So the desire in this sense is not really the desire for things or stuff or emotions or whatever, for water, for food, for whatever. Because this is just instinct. It's perfectly normal to have the instinct to want things that are good for us. There is nothing wrong with it. Why should it be wrong? Why should someone convince themselves by adding a new belief that certain things are wrong? This is just adding new stories. However, the idea of should and could, it's more a judgment than a desire. It's not really the desire that thing could be different or should be different. Because usually we don't desire impossible things. So, for example, we never say that gravity is a problem. So if someone falls, we don't say it's because of gravity. We say it's because he slipped, he was not careful, or there was a stone and he stepped on the stone and he loses equilibrium and he falls. So we say it's the stone's fault. We never say it's gravity's fault because we believe that gravity is an absolute. There is just no way to get rid of gravity. So we never say it's gravity's fault. When we think, this is called a gravity problem. So when we think of a problem, we only consider problems, things that at least in theory we can solve. So no one says that the problem is gravity because we know it cannot be solved. We say, let's say we are trying to build a plane and it doesn't fly. We say, well, the problem is that it's too heavy or the aerodynamics are not good or blah, 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 blah. But we never say the problem is gravity. There shouldn't be gravity. We understand that there is gravity, there will always be gravity, etc., etc. So we don't really judge gravity because we understand that it's not going away. So in this case, we have a belief that gravity exists that comes from experience. We have experienced gravity all the time, and we actually never experience non-gravity. I mean, maybe someone went to space, but then still gravity operates because their spaceship turns around the Earth and the Earth turns around the sun, etc., etc. So the should idea, however, is truly a judgment, is truly a belief, is truly a story that is based on something that we have never experienced. We have never experienced that something was different than what it is. I mean, everything we have experienced was what it is. It was never different than what it is. There was never a should, there was never a could. Just like gravity, we have always experienced gravity. We have always experienced whatever we have experienced. We have never experienced this alternative imagined reality. So when we break our leg, we experience breaking our leg. We don't experience the alternative imagined reality of not breaking our leg. We don't experience the alternative imagined reality of we shouldn't have broken our leg or whatever. So it's just a story. It's just a story that we add on top. And by removing this story, it actually makes life a lot easier because it removes this suffering. The suffering is the judgment, is the story that there is our experience, and sometimes it's painful, but we don't add this extra layer of suffering. So at least we don't add the judgment on top of, let's say, the pain. If we break our leg, yes, we are in pain, but at least we don't say, this is wrong, this is unfair, God doesn't love me, I don't deserve this, why me? What did I do wrong? I shouldn't have broken my leg. We don't add all those stories. And those stories are the suffering. The pain is the breaking the leg. The stories are the suffering. So once we remove those beliefs because we realize they don't make sense, of course, the starting point is that it's not that they are false because they lead to suffering. It's more like we remove because we realize they don't make sense. We remove them because we realize that it's very unlikely that there is a small part of our brain that is immune from the laws of physics. It doesn't make any sense. So the laws of physics are like gravity. Actually, gravity is one of them. So whatever happens, I mean, sure, we can say that it's the fault of the laws of physics, but that doesn't make any sense. It's just the laws of physics. It's just a continuity of events, a chain of events. From the Big Bang to now, there is a long chain of events. And those events are what they are. There is no alternative reality that actually exists. There is no could have been, should have been. This is just imagination. So the reality of could and should only exists in the imagination. And then we superimpose, we apply this imagined reality on top of our reality as a kind of filter, and it makes the reality behind it looks bad. Because of course the reality where Santa Claus exists, or the reality where we didn't break our leg, looks more appealing, looks more interesting, looks more exciting. And so we say, oh, reality is terrible. But it's not, it's just that we are superimposing this extra layer of imagined reality on top of the actual reality. And this leads to suffering. But when we think about it, we realize that the assumptions and the belief that make this imagined reality possible are very weak. They are completely contradictory. They don't make sense. They are completely illogical, etc., etc. So we then drop the belief. We don't transform it into its opposite. We don't say, oh, so there is absolute certainty that there is no free will and there is only pure determinism. We don't know, but we stop assuming that there is this free will and determinism. We wait for maybe science to discover it or us to experience it, or maybe some new information that then put together with current information will make it more likely that there actually is some kind of phenomena that allows to have free will, to make decisions in some way that is not influenced by anything. So independent decision as in independent from causality. So decisions with no cause, because that will be free will. Free will require that there is a decision, let's say an event, or that has no cause. Because if it has a cause, then it's just the result of its cause. If you can go back all the way to the Big Bang, that's the initial cause, and it's just a long series of causes that leads to now. There was no point in which it could or should have been different. It's just a long series of causes. To expect that something could or should have been different, you must believe that at some point there is some event that is completely independent from all the previous causes. And ideally that thing should happen in your brain. So there is somewhere in your brain some event that is independent from all previous causes, and that event we call it a decision. But that doesn't make sense. It contradicts with everything we know. So then the assumption for this story of this imagined reality that we superimpose on top of reality is very weak. So it makes more sense to drop this belief. Just like Santa Claus, once we start to think about it, we realize it makes no sense. And then we drop the belief. And once we drop the belief, actually reality is much simpler. It's like you get gifts because your parents bought you gifts. And you don't get gifts because your parent did not buy you gifts. And in the same way, reality seems a lot more logical and simple if there is no event, no, in quotes, decision that is completely independent from previous causality, that is immune to causality. It would be so weird if there were specific events that were completely immune from causality, and that every human brain has like a little box inside that is completely immune from causality and allows to take decisions with complete free will, free from causality. So as we think about it, as we digest it, we drop the belief. And when we drop the belief, we stop making this judgment story about how things should or could be different. And then we just see reality more for what it is. Oh, I broke my leg. Well, yeah, too bad. It's painful for sure, but that's it. It's just the reality in which I broke my leg. There is nothing else to add. There is no story to put on top of it which says that it's wrong that I broke my leg. I just broke my leg. And this removes the suffering.